Hello, marine ecology ecologists. We are going to be talking about tropical communities and symbiotic relationships for Unit 7. This is a short unit, just like the last unit, and then 8 will be short, 9 will be short as well. But 6 through 8, there'll be a test at the end of it. So this will be important for the quiz at the end of this unit, and then the test at the end of 6, 7, and 8. Okay, so tropical communities and symbiotic relationships, kind of both of them together, the main animal we're going to be talking about are corals. And so there are two types of corals. There's hermatypic and ahermatypic corals. Lots of people know about the hermatypic corals. These are the corals that produce reefs. These are the corals that have tropical fish all around them. They are very brightly colored. They have these special plant cells inside of them. They're actually algae-like cells, and they're called zooxanthellae, and they live within the tissue of the animal, the corals. Corals are animals. If you remember back to our benthos unit, unit 4, they are cnidarians. They're more closely related to jellyfish than like a sponge. So they are very closely related to jellyfish. And then the other type is ahermatypic, and these are corals that are found in deep ocean away from the sunlight. They don't produce reefs, and they do not have zooxanthellae. So they're going to be this white color that you see down below. Okay, so kind of like thinking, let's think about our different corals that we think about our head. This kind of splits it up so you can think about it well. There's hermatypic and ahermatypic. Hermatypic, they're soft and hard corals that are the brightly colored ones. And then there's ahermatypic, which are deep sea corals. Hermatypic create reefs with them. They deposit limestone, they create a physical reef, and then ahermatypic actually do not. They're basically like a bunch of sea fans that will filter feed to get food. Hermatypic can make their own food and eat. Ahermatypic only eat their own food. They can't make their own food because how do you photosynthesize without the sun? You cannot. And they don't do chemosynthesis or anything like that. So ahermatypic is only eat food. They are only consumers. Okay, so a little bit more about hermatypic. So like I said, they deposit like a limestone underneath them made of calcium carbonate. So they use the calcium in the CO molecules in the water to form their reefs. They are very productive ecosystems that create a gigantic area of biodiversity, lots of different types of fish and algae and other animals that live in that area. They are individually called a coral polyp, but all together are also an animal. So they're an animal on their own, but together they're also an animal. And the color we see, like I said, is those zooxanthellae. So you kind of break it up. Zooxanthellae. Okay, and that's how you say that. And there's a couple different, types of symbiosis that is with this type of thing, and we'll talk about those towards the end of these notes. But zooxanthellae live inside the corals, and it is a algal symbiotic relationship where they live inside of them. It's kind of the difference about some of our plant symbiotic relationships is that they live inside. That's the difference there. So let's look at some different types of corals, some really cool ones that you might have never seen before. So staghorn coral is a very popular type of coral, and it's very like stag horns. It looks like deer horns and deer antlers. Then we have lettuce leaf that looks like leaves of lettuce, which are more fan type, made of very small polyps, and they deposit a very like sheet-like, petal-like calcium carbonate. Elkhorn coral, another one that looks a little bit like an elk or horns of an elk. And so they are a little thicker than our staghorn, but they look very similar. All three of those are hard corals. And then carnation is a type of soft coral. It's very brightly colored, very beautiful. Again, hermatypic. These are all hermatypic corals. Bubble coral, and then there's a little crab in there that you see. Bubble coral is a very fleshy type of coral, and so it's a soft coral. Those are all the individual polyps that you see there. Um, Gorgonian sea fan, it's a hard coral. It creates very fan-like folds of the coral. Sea whip looks like very thin whips, but have small little polyps on every little thing. Sun coral, you can see the individual polyp is actually right here, and they makes up the whole thing. It kind of looks like a sun. This is a soft coral. Fox coral, another soft coral, and it's very bubbly, but also sea fan like. So again, it's a fleshy, soft coral. Organ pipe coral, another soft one. If you zoom in a lot, you can see that there's like little fan. It's like they're not straight little lines. They actually have like little feathers all going down all the sides. It helps them pick up more plankton. The more surface area you have, the more plankton and other food in the water column you can pick up and eat. There's brain coral. Brain coral is pretty common. It looks like a brain. There's many different kinds of brain coral, but they all, for the most part, look like this. And there's mushroom coral that looks a lot like a mushroom. And this one actually is very like, it's not hard and firm like you'd think would be. It's a little bit more movable, things like that. So, all right, so we've got our types of hard corals and then our types of soft corals. You can see that we had the first ones that we saw, and even some of the last ones were more hard. They build reefs. They have polyps that have stiff tentacles, which makes them more hard stone-like corals. And then our soft corals are soft and bendable in appearance. They look really fleshy. They have lots of feathery tentacles, like sea fans and sun corals. And these ones actually don't build. They don't build reefs, but for the most part, they're going to be found on reefs. So for your learning purposes, I don't want you to know that or need to know that. Just these are all of our hermatypic. They're living very close to the sunshine. They are very particular, and there are hard ones and there are soft ones, just depending on the type of polyps they have. Okay. Ahermatypic, these ones are 150 feet or deeper, and they can live up to 10,000 feet deep, if not deeper. We're still finding a lot more of them. Like we talked about in the beginning of the semester, we talked about Seabed 2030, which is a plan to map the entire ocean floor by using ROVs and other ways of getting down to the depths and mapping it all out. And we believe we're going to be able to find a lot more of these ahermatypic corals down at these depths. We found a lot more in 2018 off of Charleston's coast. And we think we're going to be able to find a lot more, which is like really exciting to know that there's a lot more different types of corals living at depths. They are filter feeders only, are ahermatypic corals. Remember, they eat the food that goes through their branches. They don't form reefs. They tend to grow like fans. And they do not produce photosynthesis because they do not have zooxanthellae. All right, so coral reefs, so these are ahermatypic. They have very specific limiting factors. If you remember back to bio, limiting factors means things that they need to have, or they can no longer, like they can't live there. So it's a limiting factor, something that limits their growth, limits their ability to live in different places. So there's 5 major ones, and they're very finicky. They like to have these specific, very specific to the ranges that you see here. So temperature, 75 to 77 degrees Fahrenheit, which is very tight. Now they can withstand hotter or cooler, but for the most part, they really need it to stay consistent. And if there is events like El Nino, which can make things a little bit warmer, as well as warming temperatures that come from global warming, there can be a severe issue with that. And we'll talk more about that as this unit goes on. Depth, they can't be any deeper than 40 meters. And this is because they need to see that sunlight to get photosynthesis. They need high levels of sunlight. They need pretty high levels of of salinity. So parts per thousand, it's got to be 25 or higher. Remember, normal ocean is like 32. So most places they're good. But if they're found near the shoreline, which that would make sense they would be because they like the shallow water, it can be kind of dangerous if there's a lot of runoff that is fresh water. And so not the salt that comes from runoff, but like the fresh water from streams and rain and things like that. So too much of that can cause some issues. And then sedimentation, they need low sedimentation. So any turbidity that's in the water that keeps them from seeing the sun can be a bad thing. Okay. So they get their energy from the sunlight. And the temperature of the water is what can be troublesome. The level of sunlight intensity doesn't affect them. It's actually a good thing for them. But if they get too hot, like the temperature of the water, then they can have an issue. Okay. All right, so some of the things about their anatomy. So like I said, they're little polyps that connect together and make this one animal. They're colonial, they're individual polyps that live together like these little cups or corallites in the skeleton. So they're embedded into the skeleton. They actually produce the skeleton underneath itself. But the actual polyp itself that's alive is soft-bodied and looks a lot like a jellyfish that's upside down and its tentacles are pointing up. They have a protective limestone layer base, which is not alive, but they produce it underneath themselves and it attaches to the seafloor. Okay, so you can see that their mouth and their stomach, very similar to how jellyfish start life when they're as polyps. It's the same word. And then they have tentacles like our jellyfishes. And they have, their dermis, which is their skin, and everything like that. So their mouth and anus is the same. They'll consume food and then excrete waste. Pretty basic anatomy, but they are very, very cool, very interesting. And there's a lot of complexity that we don't get to see all the time. All right, reproduction. So something special about corals is that they can reproduce both ways, both sexually and asexually. Asexual reproduction is just budding off a new polyp. So if we go back to this picture before, this is the parent polyp. They just shot off a tentacle to the left, and they made a new polyp from that. So they just mitosis, divide, and made a new one.